I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Welcome back to the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. This week, we're talking with Dorna Moini from Documate, a document automation platform for lawyers. Documate was founded to help attorneys close the justice gap through technology. By setting up easy-to-use document generation tools, lawyers can focus on what they do best, advising clients on how to resolve issues and not focusing their time on drafting documents. We're also going to talk through the thought process behind building out your law firm's products and different service delivery models for you to consider. And since we recorded this interview, Documate has won Clio's Launch Code Grand Prize at the 8th Annual Clio Cloud Conference. While I couldn't congratulate her in the interview, I'll do that now. Dorna, congratulations, and let's get to our interview. Hey, 5-Star listeners. Before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front lines so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5-STAR. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. Hey, Dorna. It is great to have you today.
Wonderful to be here, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Well, Dorna, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on our podcast to talk about client service issues is one of the issues we keep coming back to is making sure we're focusing our time on our highest and best use. And that means that we are focusing on where we can achieve the most for our clients, which then means, well, as a lawyer, our best use isn't drafting the documents necessarily. We want to be getting the right documents to our clients. But if we're coming up with strategies, developing arguments, doing lawyer stuff, developing the documents isn't going to be the best way for us to use our time. We want to have the documents achieve our goals, but not necessarily spend the time drafting them. And I think you and your company, Documate, may have a few things that we want to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit of background on me. So I used to be a lawyer and kind of faced this exact problem in my own practice. And that's how Documate came about. So what we do now is we're a no-code document automation platform that allows you not only to build internal document automation. So let's say you want to automate your Word documents or your PDF forms, but also to create client-facing legal tools. And that means that you can put these tools in front of your clients, have them enter information, either have that information come back to you so that you can generate documents more easily, or have them actually generate the documents on their own, which really cuts down on a lot of that initial time you spend on routine process-oriented work. And as you said, allows you to really focus on at the top of your practice and the top of your license.
Right. So if you were practicing before, it really developed out of you scratching your own itch.
Exactly. Yes. And I ended up at the time at my old firm getting together with my now co-founder, who's an engineer, and having him build me something that we ended up using within my firm. And so all I was thinking about was, as a very controlling lawyer, I didn't want to put it in the hands of the engineer. I wanted to be able to build it myself. So that's exactly what we wanted to do is we always say we're trying to democratize the development process for lawyers and empower lawyers to build their own technology. So that's sort of the itch we were scratching there.
Nice. So what was your practice beforehand? Where did you focus?
So I did a lot of employment law, and most of my cases were class actions, but I also did quite a bit of advice and counsel Also went to trial quite a bit for like discrimination, harassment type cases. But, for any one of these cases, inevitably you're going to spend some amount of time on routine form-based work.
Right. I was talking about it with one of my interns this morning of we have to go through trust agreements and wills. When I was still working for other lawyers, I'd be handed a trust agreement or will, and they'd tell me, go read this and tell me what it says. I'd go read it, pull out the pieces that I thought were interesting or notable for the partner. And inevitably, I would always get asked a question or two that I didn't think was important or glanced over because I was, the younger attorney, not ready, not thinking about it. So what did I do? I started compiling all those questions into one big memo so that I knew, answer all of these questions and my likelihood of getting blindsided by something is much lower. So it just built, scratching my own itch of not being embarrassed in front of a partner helped me build out the basic document. But we were talking earlier, it sounds like to jump way, way ahead of what's coming next in the documents, it sounded like we've got a way of helping guide the creation of something like that. It's not just type in somebody's name and it's going to be replaced.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have little flashbacks and maybe some PTSD hearing you tell that story, because as a young associate, it's all about just making sure all those tiny details have been taken care of. So you may spend double the amount of time you can actually bill a client because you want to make sure you didn't make an embarrassing little error. But it's not just about mail merge, like filling in data and putting it into the document. It's about really building complex rules-based systems that can take into account anything that you can think about in terms of if this, then that, if and, all the ands and ors that you want with all the dates and numbers and variables that you want. If you can put that into a thought process, you can build it out on a platform and build that is what technology is, that is what engineering is. And when you think about it, that's really what the law is. So when you look at a statute, it's if this, then that, and wherever the logic breaks down is where you end up in litigation.
Right. And it's our job to translate it so that, not only we can understand and explain it, but hopefully our clients know what the results are that they're facing. So, exactly. In terms of the no-code side of this, obviously lawyers aren't trained to be coders. There are a few of us, I consider myself an Excel coder second behind being a Microsoft Word coder. It took me years to get there, but now I can, make it do a lot of what I need to do. But most people who work with those programs, and I know lawyers are already grumbling at how awful Word is versus, Word perfect, but what does no code really mean at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question because, I don't know if you would consider like something like Excel code or not, but what we aim to have is, and what we think of as no code is something where you may have things like if then logic, but you don't need to learn the syntax. And if you are able to use any kind of simple drag and drop interface, and if you are able to just set out those statements, then it will insert that syntax in for you, and you're not likely to have to go and learn some new language.
Exactly. The new language of how to speak coding. Because,
exactly.
Right. When you get into it, so much of it ends up being impenetrable to get through. Learning how to do things in Word, even though it's a lot of click-based and know where to go, you have to know where those things are hidden or know to Google Stack Exchange and your word problem. So,
exactly. And all these systems have something different too. It's like Salesforce has one thing, Word has something else, Excel has something different. So you have to learn all these different systems.
Right. One of the things we were also talking about, and one of the phrases I wanted to come back to was you were talking about how lawyers should be, you're helping them democratize the process and build out legal products. What are you seeing? Can you talk a little bit more about what you see as legal products and where you see that's coming from, or where it's coming from and where it's going?
Yeah, definitely. So productizing the law sort of refers to this idea that work relating to the delivery of legal services can be sold not only as a service, but also as a product. If we look around at other professions that exist outside of legal, things are being sold in all different ways. You may have hourly rate services, but you may also be able to go buy a package of something, or you may be able to buy a SaaS product on a subscription basis. or buy certain numbers of hours for other types of service. So what productization refers to is taking and packaging what you have as your legal work and providing it to the public in a new form, and hopefully in a scalable form, so that especially for these more routine and form-based pieces of the work where you're not necessarily needing to pay a lawyer for the problem solving, for the strategy, for the review, for going to court and going to depositions, stuff like that. Hopefully the lawyer can build something and spend their time and invest in that, in what they're building, but then they can kind of go sit on the beach and have their clients continue to use it because they know that what they've built is already solid and is going to provide them great service.
And I can already hear, well, all you're doing is inviting the inevitable march of the robot lawyers who are going to come and crush all of us out of jobs. How do you respond to that? Why are you destroying our careers?
Well, two things. One, I think that there will never be the automation of all areas of legal. I mean, there are so many areas of legal that aren't really susceptible to automation and will always remain that way and are safe. But also, I think one thing that people don't think about as much is right now, lawyers are really only serving one or two segments of the population. One is upper middle class people, companies, those who can afford our hourly rates. I think the average hourly rate of a lawyer now is around $350 an hour in the US, and obviously much more in major metropolitan areas. And then the other is legal aid. So those who are eligible for legal aid can get legal aid from legal aid organizations or from potentially the court self-help center. But there's this entire gap in the middle of the middle class who have some money to spend on your legal work and your legal services, but they just can't afford what you're providing them. So there's actually a huge missed opportunity. And I don't know if you read much Richard Susskind, but he calls it the latent legal market. There's this huge opportunity in the latent legal market where if we build things that are scalable and affordable, everyone wins. The consumers get access, and we as lawyers get to sell our services and hopefully make more money from a selfish perspective.
Right. I mean, going out and finding those people who either could afford part of what we're doing, but not all of it, or people who couldn't afford any part of what we're doing, and serving them to make sure that we're just, not only upholding our duties to serve the public, but also to make sure that those people are getting taken care of. What sort of implementations are you seeing for that latent legal market?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the more common areas that we see are probably the areas of law that everyone sort of knows about, whether you're a lawyer or not. So family law, estate planning, some forms of contract drafting. Family law, we see a lot. We have a lot of across the board divorce, child support, allowing people to do that process online. Estate planning, we see that quite a bit as well. And then, sets of documents for smaller businesses as well.
Excellent. Yeah, we'd also been talking about, those are folks who can afford us. What about the folks who are in, the access to justice realm? What's being done there?
Yeah, within the access to justice realm, there are tons of legal aid organizations who are building amazing free tools for the public. So, for example, I think there were like 3 or 4 different tools that I know about, and probably more that I don't know about, that were launched recently with the new CDC guidance on the eviction moratoriums. And so these are tools that are being created for the public to use. And then aside from the access to justice group, there are also people nowadays who just want that DIY service. They don't really want to talk to a human. The people who go to the grocery store and they want to do the self-checkout, they don't want to talk to anyone. Those are another group that we haven't really talked about who also fit into that category.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I remember being told as a very young lawyer, well, don't get out there and blog because somebody will take your advice and they'll screw it up and then you're on the hook for it. But the reality that I've seen is the people who were going to read your blog and do it were never going to pay you anyway. We're finding a way to at least help, hopefully get them to a better result than they would have gotten on their own. And the service aspect we're thinking about is we're making it easier to deliver for them. So for the DIY clients who just want some guidance or the coaching, we can get them a more consistent product where they're coming in, they can draft something that hopefully it works for them. We're taking a look at it and this is close enough to have them use it. For the people who need more help, well, that's what we're there for our more explicit guidance.
Yeah, definitely. And it actually becomes a kind of powerful marketing mechanism as well, because once you've provided these free tools, I mean, thinking about some of the like Cooley Go, if anyone's ever, if any like startup has ever Googled anything online, you come across Cooley Go that has all these different free forms that you can access. And they're not doing that because they think that startup's going to hire them right away. They're doing that because they know that 10 years or 5 years, a few years down the line, when the company's either raising a round or IPOing, then they're going to think of that firm. And the same applies to these types of tools. If you provide content online, whether that's blog posts, checklists, full-fledged like free legal applications, those users are going to think about you when they're coming back to actually purchase services and when they're actually serious about the process, because you've built credibility up in their minds.
Right. We're lowering the walls by giving them a taste of what it's like to work for us or work with us. They can see what our products look like. They also know, well, if you're adapting to a market that is familiar with technology and you are also familiar with technology, they're more likely to want to work with you. And what I'm hearing is it's self-reinforcing, because you're going to help people. You're going to deliver your product to them. Granted, it's a small and focused thing that hopefully doesn't get you in too much trouble, but it also gives them the opportunity to get the right products for themselves.
Definitely. And I know so many people who would, if they got sent a PDF intake form from a lawyer, would just not respond because they know that firm is not using technology in an efficient way. So it is the way to kind of put your best foot forward in the initial meeting.
Right. We still, out of inertia, I guess more than anything else, we have forms that we send to clients. It's primarily an Excel form for estate planning, just to say, here, what assets do you have? And we know it's harder to have clients get that back to us. We call it homework because we do need them to do some of the work, but it's not something, like, who wants to do anything if you've got to go to a desktop computer anymore?
Right.
If we can email them what I assume would be, a link where they're just going to type in things on some sort of hosted web page to get us the information.
Right. Yeah.
It'll be easy.
They want to be sitting in front of their couch on their mobile phone, entering information while watching their favorite reality show.
So how long have y'all been doing this?
So we've been around for almost 3 years now. And actually, interestingly, at the very beginning of our company history, we were actually building some legal tools. And so we had some good experience in, we don't do that anymore. We don't build any content. We leave that to our customers. But we had some experience that really gave us some insight into how do we build the best product to enable lawyers to build everything they want and give them the full tool set. And then also, we're always happy to talk to clients if they just want to bounce ideas off of us. So that experience in the past has given us a really good kind of groundwork to be able to have those conversations with clients if they want to.
And when you've been doing this, what have been, kind of the obvious results are people are building systems to build documents. What have been some of the surprising things you've seen come out of your new ecosystem?
Yeah. So I'll say a few things. One is, and we touched on this a little bit, is new business models. So lawyers are building out tools and selling them on flat fees, subscription basis, like a mix of product plus legal coaching and additional services. So that's been super interesting to see how innovative they've become with their business models. The second thing I'll say is we have lawyers on our platform who have been selling to other lawyers on our platform. And we've been seeing that kind of happening organically. So for example, we may have an estate planning attorney who wants to expand their platform into another state and they don't have a partner in that other state, or they don't already have the forms. We've seen some conversations just happen organically on our Slack group where they'll reach out to each other or they'll post a message and they'll make a connection and they'll actually combine forces and build a more full-fledged platform, or they will buy someone else's platform. So we have plans to facilitate that process in a better way soon. And then another thing I'll say is, we've touched a lot on document automation so far, and that's definitely kind of the core, and that's the first reason that people come onto our platform. But we also enable lawyers to build expert systems. So anything really that can be rules-based can be built on our platform. It doesn't necessarily need to generate a document at the end. So for example, if you wanted to allow someone to go through the platform and figure out, at the beginning of the pandemic, some people were doing this for essential services. Is your business an essential service? You take them through a questionnaire, and then at the end of that process, you can give them the decision of yes, you are, or you're not. Guide them to the right answers, put videos, images, audio in there. And along that same vein, we've seen that used inside of firms for training purposes. So you can build an expert system that doesn't necessarily generate documents, but that throughout the process tells you like, here's the next step. And you can tell the system what you've done next. And, it'll take you to the next page that is all based on rules and logic that the attorney has set up beforehand.
Interesting. Yeah. So on the training side, would that be something where you're expected to walk all the way through a series of steps, or could you do one step, come back tomorrow when the next filing is done? What does that look like?
Yeah, either way. So, and that's actually a good point, because that's one of the kind of powerful aspects is that you don't necessarily need to finish everything in one sitting. So that applies both to the training aspect, where maybe you go through something today and then 2 weeks from now you come back to that same, we call it the workflows. You can come back to that same workflow and you jump back in where you left off and you're able to pick up and continue. It also works the same way for client side work. So let's say you send a form over to let's say you're a divorce lawyer and you're sending a form over to your client starts to fill it out, and then, they decide maybe they don't want the divorce. So they stop. And then 3 months later, something happens and they realize, actually, I do want this divorce. They can actually just come back in, pick up where they left off, as long as they saved their data and they wanted it there, because you can't delete it as well. And they can continue that process. So
interesting. So is it all, it sounded like you're still sitting with, once somebody starts, there's only one somebody who could work with a document at a time. You couldn't have two people working on the same workflow at one time, or even asynchronously.
You can actually, not at the same exact time, but what you can do is, for example, lawyer can fill out part of the workflow and then send a link to that spot in the workflow over to the client. Client can fill out the rest. Maybe the client even has a spouse that they need to forward it to, so they could forward that over to the spouse to fill out the section 4, let's call it, section 3, let's call it, and then they pass it back over to the attorney who fills out the rest. And the attorney always has the whole process on their dashboard, so they can always jump in if the client's stuck and provide them help, or change questions around so that it's understandable to the client.
Okay, so you could anticipate problem, or if you already know an answer to a question, there's a way to not force the client to answer that same question again. If you are,
yes.
If Joe Smith's wife's name is Veronica, you can either fill in the box and have them somewhat confirm it, or just skip it entirely.
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Right. Because again,
avoid frustration.
Right. Avoiding the frustration, avoiding the, we've already told you, why are you asking again?
Right.
Problem that nobody likes. And there's the balanced struggle of, we want to make sure we get it right, but at the same time, if we've already asked them, we shouldn't be asking clients again, because that's ultimately wasting their time and wasting our effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super. So as we start to wrap things up, are there any trouble spots that people get into when they start building out automations? Like where are people banging their head when they start implementing automation systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that there are sort of two things. One is scope, and two is strategy in terms of how your automation is built. So starting with scope, I always tell people, start small, think big, and iterate quickly. Because if you start with too big of an idea, you're gonna kind of get stumped and stuck because you have too much to build. But if you start with something small, like maybe a few documents, you can always add on to it, and you perfect that and you add more to it as you go. So making sure that you know exactly what you want to build and who the audience is are part of that scope decision. And then second is kind of strategizing around how you want the automation to be presented to either whether you're going to use it internally to you or yourself or your staff, or to your clients, because you often don't necessarily want things to go in the same order as your document. You may have a document that asks or has certain fields in a certain order, but for the client-facing side, you may want it in a completely different order. You may want to provide them instructions and really map out the flow differently. So I always recommend that clients put together sort of like a little bit of a process map, and those like sticky forms and those workflows that you see in all the design thinking workshops, because that's where I think you're going to be most successful and build the best tool for your end user, is when you've really thought through what's the exact customer life cycle and how are they going to get to that end result, as opposed to just kind of ticking through the fields inside of the document.
Awesome. Well, Dorna, I think we've talked a lot about how lawyers can focus on improving and streamlining, a more consistent delivery for their clients. There's obviously a lot more we could talk about, but where can our dear listeners find you on the onlines?
Yeah, definitely. So my email is open to anyone, dorna@documate.org. Our website is documate.org. We also have a chat button there, which I am often monitoring. And they can join our Slack group, which they will probably actually have to just email me to get the link to. And I'm also on Twitter at Dorna_Moini.
Excellent. Dorna Moini, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, John, for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcounsel.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.